We're just a few days away from YCS Bologna, so I thought it would be fun to put together a tier list so we can take a look at what to expect going into the event. Now this list is not meant to be absolute, but is rather meant to predict where these decks are likely to finish should they have success over the weekend. By this, I don't mean to suggest that there'll be 8 different decks in Top Card, but rather that top 8 will be a combination of these decks, in some sort of ratio. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So I want to start things off by talking about Dracotail, and I'm going to put Dracotail in top 4. I think the deck can comfortably get a top 4 finish at Bologna. In my previous tier list video, I ranked it as the best deck in the room, for the reason that it won YCS Pittsburgh, and that same weekend that it won Pittsburgh, it also won the French and the German Opens. So it is very good, and a lot of you in the comments kind of questioned why I put it as the best deck in the room, saying that the Dracotail engine doesn't feel as though it doesn't do too much, right? And I kind of agree to the extent that yes, the Dracotail engine itself doesn't do too much, but what makes it good is that it is able to play a lot of supplementary tools that allow it to perform. Now, by this I mean it's able to play a secondary engine like we see Dracotail being played with, either with Branded, Magistus, and sometimes even Dragon Maid. And because it's able to play these secondary engines, it makes it a little bit more predictable, or unpredictable I mean, and it also gives it, you know, a secondary strategy that allows it to kind of perform beyond just what the engine does. It then also has a lot of space for a lot of hand traps, and what this means is that veteran pilots, you'll see a lot of veteran players play this deck because they have the hand trap knowledge to be able to disrupt your opponent. So basically what Dracotail does is, though it has so many disruption tools, even though it has a low ceiling, it kind of forces your opponent to kind of play below them. So because of that, Dracotail feels very good. It kind of stops your opponent from playing while it just allows it to play itself. And that disruption just sort of just makes it feel like it's extremely good and probably the best deck in the room. Now, I did put it as the best deck before, and it may seem strange to put it in top 4. But the reason why I'm putting it here is because it's gained a lot of attention, right? A lot of attention has been placed on the deck, and now a lot of people respect it too. Going into Pittsburgh and the weekend it won both the French and German Opens, I think a lot of people kind of expected Dracotail not to do too well. I mean, the deck didn't really do too much before the emergency ban list, but after D-Barrier got banned, the deck got an indirect buff, and a lot of people kind of recognized that and they started playing it to success. So now, going into future events, a lot of people are going to expect it to do well. That means either they're also going to dedicate more of their side deck to deal with Dracotail, apart from just being prepared and more experienced in the matchup. So because of that, I feel as though people at Bologna are going to work a lot harder than they would have had they competed at Pittsburgh. And for that reason, I feel as though it might just fall slightly short of making the finals, but still top 4 is nothing to be ashamed of, and I think it's pretty good. Next up, I'm going to put Mitsurugi Yami in the finalist. Now, I'm talking about Mitsurugi Yami specifically. I know there are a lot of Yami variants, but I think Mitsurugi Yami will be one of the finalists at Bologna. Now, I don't think it's going to win. I think another deck's going to win, and you guys will just have to wait to see what that deck is. But I think Yami Mitsurugi has been consistently good since it's been conceptualized, and it's been able to consistently take top 4, top 2 slots, despite people being prepared for it. Now, the reason why I'm ranking it above Dracotail, even though it performed worse than Dracotail at the previous major events, is because, like I said, people have been hating out Yami Mitsurugi since it's basically became a deck. Like, people feared it, they respected it, and they dedicated a lot of their time learning how to navigate the matchup, but also how to side deck against it. And now that Dracotail has gained attention, it also pulls attention away from Yami Mitsurugi, which means that people may put less space or dedicate less space in their side deck for the Yami Mitsurugi matchup, meaning that the deck just has somewhat more of an advantage than it did going into Bologna. Now, the reason why I'm saying side deck is so important is because we're on a diverse format, so you need to dedicate a lot of things for the different matchups, and you only have 15 slots, right? So if you have to make room for something else, it means reducing the space that's already in your side deck, and because of that, I think Yami Mitsurugi will be able to capitalize on those deck changes that people are making, and because of that, I think it'll do a little bit better than it did elsewhere. Although I think it was one of the finalists at Pittsburgh, it's just that I think it'll continue that trend for quite some time until we get some kind of ban list that'll hurt the deck, or until we get Burst Protocol where a new meta starts. Now, I'm going to try and be objective here, but I'm not entirely sure where to put Lunalight. I think it should be somewhere between top 4 and top 8. Like, if I'm being objective, I obviously want to see the deck win, because I'm just, so much of a big fan. I put together like a 3-hour masterclass on the deck just because, it's something I've been playing for a while. I think the deck is underrated, and I think it can just do so much. If you want to check that masterclass out, I'll leave a link to that in the description. But for now, I'm going to put it in top 4. I think I'll settle for it there. Lunalight is great. You can play through boards. It has a very good win con in Liga. But that's also one of the things that it kind of lacks, right? Lunalight has no plan B. You go all into Liga. You get to Liga, you win. You don't get to Liga, you're probably going to have a rough time, right? And that's something that's kind of a bit difficult for the deck now that there's a lot of hand trap decks out there, right? My hand trap decks, I mean Dracotail and even Yami Mitsurugi is playing quite a lot of hand traps, and because of that, Lunalight is kind of in a position where it feels as though it's fighting an uphill battle, right? So I have showed in my masterclass that Lunalight is incredibly good at playing through hand traps, but by that it has to trade, right? There's no one card that's going to bait 2 hand traps unless your opponent plays the matchup very poorly. You basically play like a hand trap attrition with your opponent, right? By that I mean is you need to have more starters than they have hand traps in their hand, and if you do, you get to Liga. If you don't, you don't. So that's kind of the difficult part. The other difficult part is that it's been around for a couple of months, and because of that, people are now have become familiar with the deck's choke points and weaknesses, so they know how to use their hand traps more effectively against the deck. Again, they still need to have the right hand trap at the right moment to kind of stop the deck, which is why I think it'll make top 4, because it'll just be able to capitalize on that. We also know that in Germany, in Europe, there's a lot of people who have been playing the deck very well, and I think because of that, the skill gap between American Lunalight pilots and European Lunalight pilots is kind of big. I think obviously the favor being on Europe's side, so I think that's why it'll perform a bit better than it did at Pittsburgh. But I can also see why it might fall into top 8, because with the release in Master Duel, a lot of people will be more familiar with the matchup, assuming those who play Master Duel. So it is a bit difficult to see where exactly it'll finish. I think top 4 is a safe place to put it. I would love to see it in the finals, but I think I'd also be equally happy if it made top 8. Or top 4, that I mean. Also, I forgot to say that with Lunalight, I think it has a bit of a bad matchup against the deck that I think is going to win, and I'll get to that a bit later. For the reason that that deck has a card that they're able to just cheat out, and if they do, you won't be able to play at all. So because of that, assuming I'm right, it'll be very difficult for Lunalight to kind of overcome that obstacle unless they draw the dedicated out. I could be very wrong, and that deck that I think would win just performs poorly, but we'll see how things go, so I'm waiting to hear what you guys think, and maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't. As a special mention, I'm putting DDD in the Wildcard category. It's the only deck that I'm putting in the Wildcard, and I just think it is incredibly good, and I think it has a good shot of making the final, assuming that it has the right pilot. It is an extremely skill-intensive deck, and I also made some mistakes when I commented about it in my previous CLS video. A very knowledgeable DDD pilot kind of messaged me and kind of said that, no, I'm actually wrong, the deck doesn't lose to Draw and Lockbird because a skillful pilot will be able to navigate that line pretty well and still end on a slightly weaker but still incredibly strong board even through a draw. I also said that the deck kind of has a problem against Dark Ruler No More, and they were kind enough to point out that yes, Dark Ruler No More turns off the board, but they can't OTK you from that position, and DDD has an incredible turn 3 which allows them to then push through and even win in some cases. So I feel as though it is something that can take a lot of people by surprise. I know it's fallen off basically everyone's radar. We kind of expected it to be one of the best decks in the room, and then after it released, it kind of underperformed. I wouldn't say it underperformed because the deck is bad. I think it underperformed because people haven't had enough time to learn the new lines and apply them at a 15-round plus event, right? Now enough time has passed that people can be comfortable with it. We know in Europe there's a lot of people who play crazy combo decks, like I think Yugioh. He was known to play Plants and then Mermail, and he had incredible success with both of them. So if someone like him is playing DDD, this deck can take the event. But again, why I'm putting in Wildcard is because assuming it's very pilot dependent, and if there isn't a pilot that knows how to navigate it well, then the deck's going to just feel very underwhelming. So we'll see what happens. It'll be a great upset if it wins. I think it deserves a special mention, which is why I'm putting it there. Also, I know that the deck has somewhat of a weakness to 4 loss, like you special summon a lot from the deck and extra deck. That is a bit of a problem that I don't think the deck can simply overcome through comboing or through adapting its lines. But because of this, a lot of DDD pilots have recognizers, and they are now playing, I think, about 5 outs in their main deck. So they're playing the 3 Ash Blossom, the Call by the Grave, and in some cases even a Crosshair Designator. And that means that statistically they are more likely to see the out than you are to see the 4 loss. I'm going to put Ryzeal in top 16, which feels a little strange considering the last tier video I kind of said that the deck seems very lacking. Turns out I was kind of wrong, because since then it's had a lot of success at sort of a regional level. It's been taking tops here and there. I think at YCS Pittsburgh it was somewhere in the top 32 as well. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that, but it seems to be doing well, and it seems to be benefiting from the same things that Dracotail kind of benefit from. So even though it lost a lot in the ban, it's like Konami has hit this deck for sport every chance that they've gotten. But despite that, it seems to still be doing okay. Like Dracotail, it doesn't have to worry about Dimension Barrier anymore, so you can kind of go all in on Exceeds. It has somewhat of a mid-range strategy similar to Dracotail that is just able to control the game pretty well thanks to its non-engine that it's able to play, and it's able to play out quite a lot. I think the thing that separates it from Dracotail is that one, it's not as consistent as Dracotail because I think you only basically have 5 Raziel names, which means that the rest of the starters come from the Onomat package, which feels a little underwhelming. But beyond that, it's doing pretty well for itself. I also don't think it has good going second strategy like Dracotail. So I think it's something that will just be good enough to make top 16. Maybe we'll see it in top cut. But it's just slightly behind Dracotail that I can't feel confident putting it within the same realm of playability as it is. So next up I'm going to put Pearly in top 32, which feels strange considering it is a very rogue. But you need to remember that there's quite a lot of people in Italy who still stand by this deck and who have been playing it pretty well in the last couple of months. And considering that this YCS will be at Bologna, they'll have the sort of the home field advantage. I have in the past kind of said that Pearly just feels like a worse version of Lunalight. They're just trying to create an unkillable monster and then kind of control the game from them. I think the thing that separates it from Lunalight is that it can't OTK as easily as Lunalight does, so you have to play that kind of drawn out game and hope your opponent doesn't have an out. Most people won't have an out to your Pearly Noir. And the advantage, okay, that's sort of the disadvantage that Pearly has against the Lunalight. It also doesn't have as much push as Lunalight. But the advantage that it does have is that it is able to draw quite a bit. Like you can draw like 3-4 cards during your opponent's standby phase or during your standby phase, and that helps you dig very deep into the deck. And something that the deck is allowed to play is it is allowed to play very good breakers in both Lava Golem and Sphere Mode. I think both of those breakers are just something that we need to take into consideration because, well, they do beat Lunalight, but they also beat quite a lot of the decks in the format, right? We're in a format where Dark Ruler feels so impactful, and because of that, people are playing cards that can stop the Dark Ruler, but they can't respond to a Sphere Mode. And as soon as that Sphere Mode hits the field, they're losing most of their board, and you're still able to play because of your spells, special summoning monsters, meaning that you're likely gonna get an X Pearly. So the deck feels viable going first or second. So maybe it's cope to say that it'll make top 32, but I think considering these factors, it has a possibility of doing so. Speaking of the Italians, there's a lot of them who have been playing Memento and they've been doing pretty well with it. So because of that, I'm going to put Memento in top 8. I know it feels like a deck that's kind of fallen out of favor. Like, I think a few months ago, like more than 4, it was a deck that was winning back-to-back YCSs and it just kind of fell. Weird that it just kind of fell out of favor. But the deck is still as good as it's ever been. I think that Memento does its best when it is off people's radar, and we're once again in a position where a lot of people are expecting Memento. So that means it can do pretty well at these events and steal a lot of games, because going first it has just so many interrupts. Like, I think it has more interrupts than Yami if I'm not mistaken, or it can lead to more interrupts than Yami. And then going second, it has a very clear OTK line using the Akihiron to summon both the Creation King and Combined Creation to OTK. Now, I think a lot of people suspect this deck kind of got an indirect hit from one of the previous ban lists when it's no longer allowed to play the Fiendsmith package. But they'd be wrong, because this deck still plays the Fiendsmith package pretty well. It uses that Jin level 3 Light Fiend that exceeds, and that allows them to go into their Fiendsmith combo as about almost as effortlessly as they could before, because they can very easily get to level 3s on the field. We know that this deck is very difficult to interact with if you don't know how to hand trap them correctly. Obviously, well, from my experiences, you basically want to stop them from fusion summoning. They have 2 ways of doing that, and if you can stop both, then the deck's in a very weird position. You can also save your things like Impermanent Veiler for one of their fusions, and then they get a lot less advantage. So there are ways to deal with it, but there are also hands that just feel like they play through everything. Like Memento is a deck that just plays basically all engine, right? I think maybe you play like 12 breakers and then the rest is just engine, and it can do a lot. So if it's allowed to do a lot, it's gonna take a lot of games by surprise. But I think once we break into the top 8, I think that the more skillful and learned pilots will sort of know how to play against the matchup. And because of that, I think it may struggle to go a bit higher than top 8. But I think top 8 is still pretty good, considering I think it is the cheapest deck in the format right now. Speaking of top 8, I'm going to put Brandon in top 8 on a hunch, purely because it's a deck that seems to be doing better in Europe than it has in America. I think last year it was either the German or the UK nationals that it won, and then it placed second in the other of the two. It recently got new support in the Chronicle decks, and it didn't get too much, but it got enough that it kind of helps the deck become somewhat relevant again. So I feel as though Europe is the place for it to make a top 8 placement if it is to make one. Also, the new support kind of resolves some of the deck's weaknesses, like in the past, negating the Aluba with something like an Effect Veiler or an Impum would be turn ending in some situations, but now they can kind of play through that by using the Fallen and the Virtues to destroy it, preventing your opponent from negating it with something like a targeted negate. It's also got a few more inboard pieces, and it just feels as though it is in a better position than it has been in the past couple of years. It's a deck that has a lot of push. It's able to play a good amount of non-engine, although the non-engine it plays is all breakers. And it's one of those things that it has a lot of utility, so it can take a lot of people by surprise, especially if they don't suspect it. The Ido statue, of course, is also very good. I know they don't have to rely on the Ido statue, but to me it feels like the most oppressive part of the deck, being able to stop decks that just basically don't have an out when it's allowed to go first. Now, there are decks that are playing outs, like some decks are playing Book of Eclipse and are able to tribute over the Ido statue, but even then they're playing with one card down and they've used the normal summon, so it is a bit harder for them to push through. So I think it's well positioned. I could easily see it being one of the lower tiers, like top 16, top 32. But I want to put it here on a hunch. It'd be cool to see a bit of tops, and you know, a lot of people who purchase the Chronicle decks and then justify that purchase, but we'll see what happens. I guess it's also kind of cheap, like Memento, so I love to root for these decks, so let's see what happens. I'm going to put White Forest in top 32, just for the reason that it's a deck that just feels though it can't get a break, right? It's been out here catching strays for a while, and it still has a crippling weakness to Droll, which people are sometimes main decking. Most of the time it'll be in the side deck for the Mitsurugi matchups, for Lunalight, for Ryzeal, for a lot of things. Like, Droll is very impactful, and unfortunately it hurts you more than it hurts the other decks. And because of that, it's very hard to get a good grasp on this deck. Well, by that I mean you can be as skilled as you can ever be with this deck, and your opponent just needs to do a hard draw the Droll, and then you're in a very difficult situation if you don't have a dedicated out to it. So for that reason, I feel as though it's been topping somewhat inconsistently, and I feel as though that isn't going to change at Bologna. So, of course, it is still good. It's got a very high ceiling. It is able to play through a lot, so it's got enough going for it that it should make, you know, day 2 should make top 32, but I don't think it has enough to make top 8 or playoffs. So it is a bit unfortunate, but I feel as though, you know, White Forest needs something more, like maybe it needs more support, or just for the format to shift where Droll kind of falls out of favor and people aren't playing as much Dark Ruler. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird spot, but I think maybe I'm going to put it ahead of Pearly. We'll see what happens. I'd love to see it do better than this, but top 32 still impressive considering that all that it has to play through. I think I'm going to put Regenesis in top 32 as well. Now, there's been sort of those preconceptions that mid-range decks are back, and I can't say whether this is right or wrong, but because of that, a lot of people have been considering Regenesis as an option. It feels like this is sort of the right time to play the deck. Like, for example, a lot of people are playing mid-range decks, so it doesn't feel as though it's going to get overwhelmed by anything too crazy, with the exceptions of things like Memento and Lunalight, which will just almost always run it over unless they have the Unicorn before you get to play your turn. But it is sort of in a mixed spot. Now, it all depends on if your opponent is playing mid-range decks and if there is a very big shift to hand traps as opposed to breakers, because unfortunately your Genesis board is somewhat weak to breakers, but it deals somewhat okay with hand traps. It also feels like a deck that isn't really solved. Like, people are still on the fence about whether to play the Cashiera version, to play the Bastille version, or recently the Dogmatica version, and all of these are cool. They all do a good amount of control things, which we haven't really seen in a while, but they also don't do enough, and they're also dependent on winning the die roll. So because of that, I feel as though it is somewhat inconsistent. Like, if you can win more die rolls than you'll lose, you can expect to do pretty well with this. But if you have to rely on the die roll, it's a bit of a yikes in my opinion. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully it does better. Maybe it won't. Maybe people are right. I honestly couldn't tell you. So I'm putting it in top 32 because I feel it feels safe, but we'll see how things play out. I think Malice can comfortably go into top 8 or maybe even top 4. So I'm going to put it in top 8 for now, but we might move it later. And it's a deck that's been on the rise for a very long time. Well, not for a long time, in like the last 2 weeks or so. We've been seeing more and more Malice, and they've just been doing pretty well for themselves despite been hit severely by the ban list. I say severely because like they've been hit like basically every ban list. They've gotten some kind of hit, and it feels like the deck. Well, it feels like the deck should be in a bad position, but it really isn't because the end board is as strong as it's ever been. It's just that it has some inconsistency issues, and because of that, I think we've seen sort of a shift to people playing a supplementary engine with Malice. So over the recent weekend in Germany, I think it was one of the regionals, we saw 3 of the top 8 spots being taken by Radiant Typhoon Malice. Now, I can't exactly tell you where the bridge is between Radiant Typhoon and Malice or what exactly this version of the deck does because we don't know enough about it just yet. But I feel as though it's going to be something that's going to take Bologna by surprise. We saw Yuna Dix as one of the pilots who played Malice Radiant Typhoon at the German regional. She finished 2nd, and we also know she's a very good Malice pilot, having gone, I think she finished 1st after Swiss at Worlds. So it is a deck that is very good, especially in a good pilot's hands. And I guess we're just going to wait to see what exactly the Radiant Typhoon does for the strategy. In my opinion, if we have to prioritize how we're going to use our non-engine against Malice, because I think Malice is only really frightening when it's going first. When it's going second, it kind of has to rely on its non-engine. So when Malice is going first and you have a bunch of non-engine and you want to kind of prioritize how to use it, I don't think Radiant Typhoon is very oppressive in and of itself, so I will generally save my hand interactions for the Malice Link monsters and the stuff that they summon from the extra deck, right? Because those are the resources they have infinite, while they have a ton of ways to sort of get to them. So safest way to use your hand trap would probably be on the extra deck stuff, unless you just draw critical massive hand traps, and then you can be a little bit liberal in how you use them, and you can use them on some of the Malice names. I just think it's safer to now use it on the extra deck because we don't really know what the Radiant Typhoon stuff does. So it'd be cool to see. Maybe this takes us by surprise and it goes into the top 4. Maybe it'll be top 8, or maybe it won't do anything at all. So we'll have to see as things go along. I'm going to put it at the top of top 8. I don't think there's anything in top 8 that can be better than it right now, but we'll see as we go through the list. I think we can comfortably put Apophis in top 16. I don't know if it will be ahead or below Ryziel. I think considering its success at YCS, I'm going to put it above Ryziel. It's a very control oriented deck, which I kind of like because we haven't seen a lot of control things in a very long time. Like Regenesis, it is something that is more geared towards going first, but I think the way that it's been innovated recently, where it's able to play so much of the Dominus cards and the Primate engine, allows it to be played as a deck that can just perform going first or second, which is exactly what you want when you're going into a event that's 15 plus rounds, right? So I think that's why it has the edge over Regenesis, but it's also lost its surprise factor having won a YCS recently, so it's a bit difficult for the deck to go higher than it was before because people now know how to interact with it. Wouldn't be surprised to see it in top 8, but I think safest place to put it would be top 16, considering that there are some things working against it right now. I'm not exactly sure where to place Orcus, right, because it feels like a deck that is being carried more by the Mitsurugi portion of the deck than the Orcus, but it is still somewhat good. It can take a lot of decks by surprise, and I think, yes, its success will depend on how popular Malice is and how well prepared people are for that, because in the past, I think something that kind of held the deck back is that it had, I don't want to say a crippling weakness to Lancia, but it had somewhat of a weakness to Lancia, which people were playing for the Malice and Crystron decks. So it kind of had a harder time being able to take the top slots. Now it's kind of in a similar position as Malice, where if people don't respect it and they're not playing Lancia, it can do pretty well. But I feel as though it also has, I wouldn't say some inconsistency problems, but there is some variance in your end boards based on what you open. So I think I'm going to put it in top 16, assuming people are playing it with the Mitsurugi engine as opposed to something like Horus or Azamina. I think, you know, Mitsurugi obviously the best home for Orcus right now. What I like about it is that it has more layered interrupts. Like if you have the field spell card plus the Crescendo, you don't really worry about hand trap. I mean, you don't really worry about breakers too much because you obviously have the Crescendo to negate one of them, and you can play from the graveyard with the field spell. So it's decent. I think it's like the bare minimum in terms of what you want to take when you're going into a YCS level event. Obviously, I don't know as much about Orcus as I'd like to, but I think top 16 is a safe place, and I think most of you will agree too. Believe it or not, but I think K9 Crystron is gonna win YCS Bologna. Okay, so this may seem somewhat weird, and it's probably me being biased because before I started playing Lunalight, I played Crystron for about 6 months, and I got me my first OTS win, so I am somewhat attached to the deck, and that's probably maybe clouding my judgment. But I feel as though K9 Crystron is in a good spot to win. So obviously at Pittsburgh, I don't think it made top 8. I think the highest it placed was top 16 or top 32. And a lot of people kind of suspected that the deck is now dead after the emergency ban list that got rid of the Mjolnir, which was basically the deck's win con. But since then, there's been 2 innovations which I think we need to talk about. The first of which is that people just found another lock, right? So we obviously don't have Mjolnir, so what do they do instead? They're now using Spell Canceller, which they are able to sort of summon from the deck, indirectly, I mean. So you'll use River Stormer to send Spell Canceller, which is a machine, from the deck to the graveyard, and then you'll later on in the turn make the rank 5 princess to summon up to your side of the field, and then you already are insulated from breakers, which is one of the deck's weaknesses, right? So Kenan Krishnan was kind of a deck that put most of its hand onto the field, and before a single Dark Ruler kind of just meant that they had the cluster and maybe an Izuna in hand, but now with the Spell Canceller it means that your opponent can't Dark Ruler, they can't Super Poly, and they most definitely can't Droplet you because of the Spell Canceller, which just says your opponent can't activate spell cards and negates the effect of any spell cards on the field. So that obviously fixes a lot of the problems that the deck is having. It's also very difficult to stop the Spell Canceller because, for one, you cannot use something like a DD Crow to banish it from the graveyard before they can summon it to the field, because they will have the Ripper on the field, and the Ripper can just negate any monster from the hand or graveyard, which is kind of crazy. And I think they'll also wait to summon the princess, and although some of the princess after that they've made an infinity, so you can't even say that you'll wait to imperm the princess because they can just negate it with infinity, and then if you keep the imperm in hand for your turn, you can't exactly use the imperm because the infinity will just negate it, or they'll have a drag on the field and it's even harder for you to get rid of it out it. There's also the problem and the challenge that I believe, yeah, so it's Lupus. Lupus gives the Exceed targeting protection, and if they put the Lupus on the princess, then it's very difficult. Like, it's almost impossible to stop the lock. You basically have to have like a critical mass of hand traps to stop them from getting that far in their combo, but we obviously know that the K9 portion of the deck plays through hand traps pretty well, or they benefit from hand traps. And we also know that Krishnan Sastaros is basically a cheat code against hand traps, being able to cheat out drags as soon as your opponent tries to interact with your board. In some situations you can also use the Sastaros to dodge, to protect the Salvador from being negated, although I think they need a second target like Citri in the deck to do that, which they're not playing. So it just feels very well positioned, and I kind of spoke about that first reason for quite a bit. The second reason is that because people have started innovating their non-engine with the deck, they've kind of recognized that with Spell Canceller, the going first board is as strong as it's ever going to be, or as strong as it needs to be. So instead, they're going all in on breakers as part of their non-engine package. So they also get to play 9 sort of auto wins because they get to play the 3/4 lost, the 3 droplets, which is just free with the Crystron engine, and then the 3 Dark Ruler, which is also started to include. So it feels very good. I think it's in a position where it can win another YCS. Kind of hope that it doesn't, because the more attention this deck draws, the more likely it is to get hit by the ban list, and as a Crystron enthusiast, I wouldn't want to see that happen again. So hopefully it doesn't, but I feel as though it's got a lot going for it right now that makes it the best in the room. So yeah, if I'm right about K9 Krishnan, you kind of want to have something like a Kaiju in your side deck to deal with the Spell Canceller so you can play. Or if you're just playing a strategy like Dracotail, or I guess even YCL doesn't play too many spell cards at the moment. If you're playing like one of those decks that just it's very monster centric, then you shouldn't be too impacted by the combo line that they're going for, so you should be fine. This is also why I said Pearly might be somewhat well positioned, because assuming K9 Krishnan is the best in the room, then Pearly, which is able to play Sphere Mode, and Lava Golem can just eat their board for free and then play from there. So I guess we'll see how things go out. I don't know if you guys will agree with this, but I just think it makes sense for now, so I'm going to kind of stick to my guns and put it at number 1. I'm going to put Fire King in top 32, probably somewhere towards the top of top 32. I think it's a deck that a lot of people have said, like the ones who've had success with it have noted that they've had success because people weren't too familiar with it. Fire King became famous in Europe by Dinka, so it's possible that a lot of the people who are playing at the top tables will be familiar with the strategy, so it will be a bit harder for the deck that is already having to work a lot harder than the other decks in the room to kind of reach the top tables. Of course, if Dinka is playing it, then it shoots straight into top 8 or even higher, but I think the safest place to put it would be top 32. Obviously, this is still impressive, because considering if anything makes top 32, it means it's like the best out of 1,000, 2,000 players. So yeah, it's a good place to be. It'll be interesting to see if it is able to compete, or if Dinka is even going to play it. So let's put it in top 32. Maybe we'll see something crazy like it being in the finals, but nah, I think we were past the point where Fire King can kind of do that. Not, you know, throwing hate at the deck. I just think, you know, realistically, the Durek hasn't done enough for the deck as we would have hoped, and we basically just need something for it to kind of push it back to the top tables. I'm going to put both RB and Gem Knight in top 16. So RB, in a previous video, my previous tier list, I kind of said that the deck is something that's not worth playing. And a lot of you guys pointed out that, you know, I was kind of wrong for saying that, and I'm thankful that you have, because, you know, you were both polite about it and also corrected a mistake of mine, which I'm hoping that you'll do with this tier list as well. But a lot of you have noted out that at a regional level, it has been topping every now and then. It topped a lot more than things like Branded and Momil and a lot of outliers, so it seems like there's something that should be on people's radar. I think it will be, because a lot of times it is being paired with Sky Strikers and things like that, which allows it to perform a bit better, or it gives it more utility. As for Gem Knight, it's been consistently good. It's never been consistently great. I think during the first YCS it attended, where it made top 4, it was very good for 2 reasons. 1, people didn't expect it, and 2, because it still had Protoss. Now, losing Protoss means that it doesn't really have too much when going first. I think it can end on like 1 or 2 negates at best, with a couple of bodies on the field, which just isn't enough in the current format. And going second is obviously where it shines, but a lot of people will now just make you go first if they know you're playing it. And at an event that's like 15 plus rounds, people talk, and it can make it very difficult if you're on a win streak with Gem Knight, because then, you know, their friends will just tell their friends, which tells their friends, and then sooner or later everybody knows you're playing the deck, and they know that if they win the die roll, they're going to tell you to go second. Or rather, they're going to go second, you're going to go first. I'm going to now put Punk, Blue Eyes, and Live Twin all in top 32. So they're very roguish, like they're falling off people's radars completely. Well, especially Live Twin and Blue Eyes for some reason, and well, I guess I know the reason. It's because, well, they're not exceptionally good when, well, they're not specifically good when they go second. They kind of need to win the die roll. I kind of like Live Twin, and I would like to see it do a lot better, because it is one of the few decks that should be and is allowed to still play the Fiendsmith package. And when it goes first, it has a very unassuming board that is reinforced by the plethora of hand traps that they're able to play. So I feel as though if Ryzel is allowed to do well, then this should be able to do well too. So I'm actually going to move it up to top 16, just because it is able to play a bit more consistently than Ryzel. It's just that it is something that a lot of people aren't playing because of the fear of Full loss. But I've also seen people who play this deck and they get 4 lost once, and then they get 4 lost twice, and then they just deck out your opponent. So that is always a viable strategy. Or they could even take a page out of the DD player's book and make space for the call by and the cross out in the main. As for Blue Eyes, it is very mid-range, which makes it somewhat similar to Dracotail. I think the thing that separates it again is because it isn't as good when going second. It doesn't have as much push, and unfortunately it has to play a couple of breaks, which makes it somewhat inconsistent. Of course, Primate Engine is very good. I think it's very well positioned in this format, being able to negate a lot of the breakers while being able to, well, also gives you some play in going second. But I don't know if you can rely on it, considering it is things that you have to hard draw, and it isn't exactly a part of the engine. It's more like Primate bridges into Blue Eyes, but not so much Blue Eyes bridges into Primates. So that's something there. Punk is also something that has yet to be solved. It was playing pretty well when it had Fiendsmith, but now it obviously isn't allowed to play Fiendsmith anymore. So it'll be interesting to see how people play it. I think you might just see it being paired with Mitsurugi like anything else. But again, it's something that feels very, very rogue. So if we are going to see it top, I don't think it'll go higher than top 32, but it'd be cool if it did. Lastly, I'm going to talk about both Sky Striker and Momil. So I think Momil can be at the bottom of top 16, maybe the top of top 32. It's very similar to Branded, that it has a clear win con in that it's able to summon out the water barrier statue, which kind of prevents your opponent from special summoning. Unlike Branded, it's a lot easier to out the water barrier statue because people are already playing things like Super Poly and Dark Ruler, Book of Eclipse, those kind of things that all deal with it. And that is something that you always have to consider when you're investing so much to get into that win con. But I think what people forget about Momil is that Momil is also a hand rip deck. So it is able to rip like 3 or 4 cards when going first, which means your opponent has to then have specifically a starter and a breaker to be allowed to play. Of course, we're assuming this is that the Momil player goes uninterrupted. The challenge though is that the Momil engine feels as though it's somewhat inconsistent, and it also has a Krypton weakness to Droll. Of course, it can still play somewhat through Droll. It's not like White Forest, which is why I'm placing it ahead of it. But it obviously does not do enough under Droll, and that is always something that you're gonna have to worry and dodge, considering it is a mainstay in people's side deck, if not the main. As for Sky Striker, I'm not entirely sure where to put it. I want to put it in top 8 because I think it's had a good showing lately. It is also something that we need to respect because when he gets the new support, it will be tier 1 for sure. And in Europe, there's been a lot of pilots who have done well with it. I can't remember the name, but there was someone who played it at Worlds. She made top 4 with Sky Striker. So it'll be interesting to see if she plays it again. If she does, I think a lot of her success, like Mermail, will be on being her ability to dodge Duel and Lockbird. Assuming she does dodge it all, she'll probably be able to do quite well. But if she doesn't, then this deck immediately starts to fall. So it is a bit difficult because you have to think about the fact that at a YCS, you're only allowed to lose twice if you want to make top 8, and even then you aren't guaranteed. So you just have to hope that your opponent doesn't have the troll in game 3. But if they do, you're going to have a rough time. And if they don't, you probably have enough utility to win. So it is a gamble. So we'll see how these decks do. Be cool to see if Sky Striker wins because, you know, well, I mean, make top 8 or top 4 or whatever, because it is something that it does something different from other decks, right? It's very spell orientated, it's very control. It can go second like Gemini, it just has a bit more viability when going first, and I think the added utility is just something that makes it so very cool to play against, and as well as to pilot. Something that I forgot to talk about is Vanquish Soul. So I'm actually going to move Sky Striker from top 8 to the top of top 16, and I'm going to put Vanquish Soul in top 8. So the reason why I'm making the switch is because realistically speaking, I only think about 2 of the decks which are top 8 or higher will actually make the top cut, so maybe 2 to 3 of them. These are just the decks that are, you know, likely to see the top 8 in my opinion, and I think Vanquish Soul is something that needs to be talked about in the same breath as Malice, for the reason that it is something that is re-emerging into the format. So it has lost a lot of its consistency tools, and it is a deck that has somewhat of a weakness to Duel and Lockbird, considering that it needs a critical mass of things in hand to resolve its effect. But it's basically as powerful as it's ever been, and assuming it dodges the draw, it can do pretty well for itself if it dodges the hate, and if people are at a point where they aren't really prepared for it. And that's exactly why we've seen a rise of it having success at the YCS level, well, not the YCS, at the regional level, and I think it can carry over to a YCS. Now, of course, if it is getting drawled, or if it is hand trapped correctly, it's just going to feel like a worse version of K9 Crystron, because you're basically then just playing the K9 package with nothing else. But I think it is still something that deserves respect, so I'm going to put it behind Malice, because I think Malice is the thing that is going to dominate, or most likely to be in the top 8. And I think Vanquish Soul is close behind it, with Memento in 3rd and then Branded in 4th. I think there is a world where we do this instead, where we put Branded in top 16 and Sky Striker in top 8, just because, you know, Sky Striker has had more consistent results than Branded. Branded is somewhat of, I wouldn't say a wild card, but something of an outlier at this point. So we'll see how things transpire. I think this is a more accurate reflection of what I think the list should look like. So that's going to be all from me. I think some of you have asked if I'll be attending YCS Bologna, and unfortunately I won't be, because I live very far from Europe and it's just not feasible for me to get there. So instead I'm counting on one of you guys to have success with Lunalight in my stead. If you're going, good luck, have fun, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your results soon.